Oh boy, here we go. Now, these are not the type of videos I enjoy making. My favorite type of video to make is where I can sing the praise of a film or TV show, highlight a director's craftsmanship, or exclaim my love for a specific piece of content, and maybe encourage someone else to check it out or look at something from a different point of view. However, sometimes a movie comes out that really gets under your skin, one that irks you and gets in your head, frustrating you from every conceivable angle. And that, folks, is where Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes enters the chat. Before I even talk about this movie, can we please collectively get the studio to stop feeling the need to add "of the planet" into every title of these movies? The first one, fine, it's a reboot of a franchise, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. But after that, you can simplify it. Just do Dawn of the Apes, War of the Apes, Kingdom of the Apes. People know, we're not dumb. It's the ape movie. We won't get confused. Again, I didn't want to make this video. I really didn't. I actually wasn't even gonna see this in theaters, and not because I don't like the franchise. I think the original Planet of the Apes film from the 60s is a fantastic sci-fi film with one of the best movie twists of all time. I think Rise is a perfectly fine movie, Dawn is pretty entertaining, and War is a really solid conclusion to the trilogy, a perfect cap to the story and end to Caesar's arc. And I thought, okay, now we're done. But we weren't, as a couple years later it was announced that the series would continue on with a fourth Apes film titled Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And I was really confused. I thought we had finished the story. Caesar led apes to freedom, away from humanity, he died. The end. Story over. Not so fast, the money-hungry studio said. Now, I'll be completely honest. I like ape movies. I like King Kong, but there's a weird obsession with ape and monkey movies, and I don't get it. Some people just really like movies about apes and monkeys. Hey, I'm not shaming. I really love slashers, and most of them are pretty terrible. I'm not shaming. I just don't get it. In the same way people probably don't get why I'd love movies about psychos and mass killing really poorly developed characters. But that aside, I also have another confession. During the entirety of the marketing for this film, up until about a week ago, I totally thought this movie was about Caesar's son. It is in fact not about Caesar's son. Instead, I think it takes place like 300 years later. I'm not exactly sure. In the opening text it just says many generations later, but I feel like I remember reading an article that said 300 years. Maybe I'm making that up though. Either way, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes seemed to me like an unnecessary story. It felt like corporate greed superseding artistic integrity yet again, and was I right about that? Yeah, I'd say so. Absolutely. Look, I know this film is getting good reviews. I'm not blind to the fact that I'm in the minority here. But even if you like this movie or love it, you can at least admit that War was a perfectly satisfying ending to the Apes franchise, and that this wasn't really necessary. And don't come at me with, oh, no movies are necessary. I'm just saying it in the way that I said we probably didn't need 3 Hobbit movies based around one book, or 10 soon to be 11 Fast and Furious movies. At some point, I'd say it's overkill. Halloween is my favorite horror film, and my favorite movie of all time, period. I'd watch that shit any day. However, I don't think we need 13 of them. Doesn't that seem a little excessive? And honestly, I had low expectations, so I figured since it was a rainy Saturday afternoon, a blockbuster Apes movie couldn't possibly be that bad. And the worst part, the part that irks me the most, it isn't. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is not a bad movie. The title of the video still holds some weight though, as I feel like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes may be the most average, safe, and generic blockbuster film I've ever seen. All the pieces are there. Visually, at least from a CGI and motion capture perspective, the film looks genuinely pretty great. I'm never once taken out in terms of the effects, and the voice acting is really stellar across the board. There's not a moment where I don't feel like I'm watching an advanced society of apes interact. And even as someone who loves the original Planet of the Apes, it was the 60s, and the costumes, albeit amazing, were still costumes. So the ability to craft a film like this with the use of motion capture and really fine-tuned attention to detail is commendable and cannot be denied. However, where this film struggles the most is the script. I really would love if anyone who loves this film can tell me one unique thing that happened in this movie. Just one thing that's interesting or different, one thing that didn't happen in the previous Apes movies, one story decision or plot point that catches you off guard or surprises you in any way. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, God, I hate that title. Its biggest cinematic crime is that it's not a completely incompetent mess of a film in the way Madame Web is. It's not a completely tone-deaf, reactionary pile of garbage like Star Wars Rise of Skywalker.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
I mean, are you kidding me?
The biggest crime is that it's just boring. Caesar was a character we grew intensely attached to. We saw him from his birth to his death. He was given a lot of character and depth. Over the course of 3 films, we saw him grow from a rebellious young ape to a father, husband, and leader of the entire ape society. We saw him struggle between his inherent love for humans, as he was raised by one, and the burden and responsibility that came along with the fall of human society and the rise of the apes. The people who raised him conflicting with those he leads, those he's liberated. I genuinely couldn't tell you one defining characteristic or personality trait of our new lead, Noah. And that goes with all the characters in the film. They all sort of feel razor thin, not quite poorly written, but just very uninteresting. There's very few, if any, moments in the film that happen between characters that are genuinely interesting, and the story itself just feels like a lazy rehash of the last few Apes movies. Just a mismatch of different plot points and story beats thrown together just with a new set of apes. There is one specific story element that is kind of interesting that incorporates the film being set generations after the last movie. However, that plot point is barely explored at all. And I'm not usually one to complain about a film being too slow, but the pacing truly makes the film feel like it's moving at a snail's pace. And unlike all 3 previous Ape movies, the action set pieces are really forgettable and feel like worse versions of those other movies. Even the human characters, which weren't always the best in the other 3, were super unremarkable and painfully dull. And I was actually pretty excited for Kevin Durant's villain Proximus, as his line, "What a lovely day," in the trailer was one of the few intriguing moments that made me want to see the movie. But he barely has any screen time, and when he does arrive, he's got a bit of charisma but is barely utilized to the point where I can't really help but care. In the previous films, the dynamics between the protagonist and antagonist were interesting and fleshed out. Koba betrays Caesar, his own brother in arms and friend. Caesar wishes for peace amongst humans and apes, but Koba's actions destroy that relationship. Woody Harrelson's villain in War kills a member of Caesar's family, adding a personal element to the story and a bit of tragedy to it. While I'm not as in love with that trilogy as I was when I was younger, I can at least respect the trajectory of how the story played out, both in the individual films and across the entire trilogy. This film seemingly is building to this revenge story, but the climactic sequence is so repetitive and cliche and mind-numbing that the whole thing just feels like a letdown in a really anticlimactic fashion. I think the bare minimum of a blockbuster film like this should at least be a bombastic and exciting finale, but the events that unfold just feel like the writers were checking off boxes of what fans might expect. And for a film that's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, characters, especially the lead, have such quick shifts in emotion. No joke, there's a moment in the film where a character says, "It is the law," in a tone of defeat, and then immediately, not even 5 seconds later, exclaims, "But the law is wrong," as generic emotional music swells. I'm not even joking. When that happened, I laughed out loud. There's another moment earlier in the film where it seems like a character is parting ways, and then a minute later, nope, they're back with the main group. Yet everything else in the film happens again at the slowest rate imaginable. For most of the film, there really is no evolution to the story. It's just a string of things happening with no change in the plot or characters. Our characters don't really grow or change. Nothing is different by the end of the film. Sure, I could get all film student-y and rant about the uninteresting musical score, as a lot of the music was predictable and forgettable, or how despite the beautiful effects and motion capture performances, the actual cinematography and shot selection felt really bland and uninspired. But again, most of those elements boil down to just being serviceable. As mentioned, the worst part of this film is not that it's bad or horribly constructed, but ultimately is a film that serves the sole function of checking every box without hesitation and to profit off a franchise. My biggest fear going in was that this film was unnecessary. Those fears were realized and accentuated, as leaving the theater, I couldn't help but feel like it was made not because there was a story to tell, but money to be made. Well, guys, that's really it for today. And like I said, I recognize I'm in the minority here. I know this film is getting good reviews from critics and audiences, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. My least favorite type of film is a 5 out of 10 forgettable blockbuster, and that's exactly what I would describe this movie as. This isn't even a film I can return to and laugh at or poke fun at with friends like Madam Web. It's just sort of a bland, forgettable entry in a franchise that's exhausted its efforts. But if you liked the video, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and hey, click that little bell notification button so you get notified when I post new content. And hey guys, leave me some comments. I know a lot of people probably disagree with this take and like the film or even love it. Let me know why I'm wrong and why you enjoyed the film. I'd love to have some great discussions with you guys. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next video.